Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to come out and play and review today the 1979 film The Warriors. Some people may be confused because The Warriors had spun off a video game and all kinds of things. I guess with a company called Rocksteady or whatever. But going into this movie, I really did enjoy this piece. Like, it does, like, kind of have this, like, setup, but then the rest of the movie just becomes this, like, I would call it, like, a chase kind of film, but people would feel differently. People would probably call it, it's like, no, like, it's kind of like a fight out film where like you mix in the warriors with every gang supposedly near the Bronx or in the vicinity of the Bronx, because it seems that at the very beginning of this film, we have guys like Swan who is mentioning that they don't want to go to the Bronx, which is technically where they're heading, to eventually go to this one spot that is exactly in Van Cortlandt Park, and they are to go and have a meeting being done by a man called Cyrus, and that groups up a bunch of different gangs, and it becomes to a point of there being about like 60,000 strong supposedly in this one environment. uh, Whether that's accurate or whichever, like, still it's kind of pretty impressive to get all those people all in one group and then be quiet for them to be able to orchestrate this whole thing. But yeah, so really we have a very beginning of a movie where, like, at first it seems all good and well that all these gangs are going to supposedly work together to, like, control everything. But then, of course, we have one person who's like, yeah, I'm not all about that life. Like, I'm going to go on my own, and I'm going to have to just wipe out the one person that is telling me to group together, and like that's just not gonna work. So all of a sudden, right after that, we have the warriors that are wrongfully accused of assassinating Cyrus, and they, like, it doesn't quite seem like all of the gang members know that they were to be accused of all of this. It seems like eventually some people start finding out later on in the movie, and so on and so forth. But yeah, like, but this is like a really fun film. There's little bits and pieces that I got to learn before getting to this review. Like, supposedly all the vests that you were to see the Warriors all wear, I guess there was only like one per person. Basically, meaning like all the vests that you see in this movie, those were all the ones that were in existence. Like, we have some guys like the guy who played Ajax, who I guess is the only one that has like one last remaining vest, because all the other ones either got like destroyed or probably got sold somewhere. But I'm sure a lot of the vests aren't kept in like mint or whatever condition, if there's any left that do exist besides the one that Ajax has. Like, more than likely there might be some like bits and pieces of it, but yeah, there was only one vest per every warrior member, and I'm sure there was probably a lot of just one-off things that a lot of people uh, like wore in this film. And so yeah, that's kind of very fascinating to me to also like know that. Um, but yeah, also it seems the guy who ends up getting chucked out of the subway, who ends up dying early on as the team of the Warriors, I guess, supposedly from what I had heard, but like there is not always reliable sources about this. Supposedly the guy who ends up getting killed in the subway station, evidently he was difficult to work with during that time, but that's like alleged allegations. There's no concrete evidence of that, but maybe if there's a commentary track on the Warriors, which I have not watched and went into and whatever, maybe like there's real truth to any parts of this. But anyways, so But you can go ahead and see the Warriors if you have HBO Max already. You can go out of your way to say that you've seen the Warriors yet again if you haven't seen it in quite a long time. I know this is like one of those big cult classic movies that I just wanted to see just because like I enjoy this movie. It's a lot of fun, and like the concept of it is just really cool. Like it's a really just cool concept of a film, and then you just eventually just keep seeing these different kind of variety of gangs going and attacking the warriors, which like I just find this movie fascinating. Like some people could say like, well, yeah, but like, look at the budget of this film. Like, you can tell, like, the gangs, like, their costumes don't look all that cool. I'm like, well, like, it kind of makes them honestly look even more, much more authentic when honestly looking at it. Like, do a lot of gangs have a lot of money for their outfits? Probably not. So when looking at it, like, the way that these things were put together and how, um, severely like different every gang was where like there's a whole gang that just wears black shirts, or there's a whole gang that just wears clown makeup and like baseball attire. There's a whole gang that is just like a that looks like a biker gang, but they're in a graffitied car. So and so on and so forth. And like supposedly, I guess there were 20 different gangs in total for this movie. So like there is so many things that probably like weren't covered in the actual like movie, but you could probably tell like, well, this gang was there or this gang was there. Like there's a whole thing that I caught where there was like 21 different gangs, and like I'll like try to catch some of the names, especially when we get through like the beginning parts here. I'll catch some kind of bizarre different names that isn't exactly completely covered in the film, but are like little second little blips of whatever goes on in this movie. So, but anyways, but I'm not going to guarantee that either because there's a lot of goofy names in there. So, anyways, let's yeah. How would I grade this movie? I would say I would say this has to be like a great film. Like a lot of people like, but there's a lot of leeway between that. Like it's a great film, but there's like a lot of leeway on either side because people could probably say that this is just a chase film, and it kind of gets like a little bit of like eventually how like people could be like, man, like the best part about this is like the early parts, and then after it just kind of gets a little tired of like you seeing this like chase or beat 'em up kind of scene or whatever. I wish like this whole thing would have had a lot more in depth, which probably could a lot of people could complain or like could say that. On the opposite spectrum, people will be like, man, like yeah, like this movie is so like heavily like different than anything else, and like it's like grounded in like realism and blah 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 blah. So like a lot of people could really have loved this movie, and this could be like anyone's favorite film, and I could completely understand that. So with that said, I would say that this is a great film, but like there's also wiggle room in there. So with that said, let's go out of our way to go into that double five time territory because I think it's that coveted time again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time to spoil this movie. So in the very beginning of this, we have the Wonder Wheel that is to be showcased in the very beginning of this film. Some kind of Ferris wheel of sorts. Cleone is to tell the warriors that they are to eventually go on and have a couple of them go out to this place to go to this meeting with Cyrus. And so we have the gang members that are like questioning stuff like who is this Cyrus guy, like how really important is this? Like, should we really come unarmed? This seems kind of like, is everyone else gonna come unarmed? Like, plus also, like, should we go through and start like beating the crap out of some of the other gangs to kind of like get a rep up or something like that to just try to like. So there's a whole bunch of questions that are being had, and so but I thought Cleone was, or I'm hoping pronouncing names right because I'm probably gonna butcher some things down the road here. Um, but Cleon like looked like a really cool leader, and also looked like he had like skill at fighting. So it was kind of cool to see Cleon in this movie, as well as any of the other kind of warriors, and to see like their skill set. And a lot of people love Ajax. I know that. But anyways, let's go on. So the guys, evidently the warriors are known to go through a subway, and so that's how we begin them getting to where they need to go, because they're going to have a long stretch of subway drives or subway times during this film. So we get the warriors to go on to this meeting, and so like uh I'm gonna start rattling off some characters that you won't actually consistently see throughout this movie. Uh, like the Boppers are to make their appearance here. The Hurricanes, the Electric Eliminators, which I think you just see the back of in their yellow jackets. You see the Saracens, which have these like black tank tops, and they're coming out of some subway in this film. Um, the Jones Street Boys that are just somewhere in this large group of people. The Savage Huns, which really I think they're also coming out of somewhere to get to this party. Uh, the Satan's Mothers, which you I guess just see the back of one of their vests. The Royal Avenue Runners, which I guess you see them coming out of a subway. The Moon Runners, which eventually you kind of see like right around the time when Cyrus to be getting assassinated. They're wearing these like bright purple tank tops, and the Van Cord Land Rangers, whatever the Rangers like team is, like they bizarrely have these like black and white striped shirts, like one of the gang does, and they have these like really thick looking like detective hats on. That's what it kind of looks like for them. Um, but yeah, we'll get on with the actual movie. So anyways, we push on to have Cyrus going and having everyone meet at the Von Cortlandt Park and Cortland Park. So we have Cyrus, who is to do this speech, who's to mention that there's 60,000 strong here, and that if anything, like the police department is only like 20,000 strong. So Cyrus is to be like, "Can you dig it?" And everybody's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Can you dig it?" And like, "Yeah." Like, so Cyrus is to consistently tell them that like they should be able to like group together and like be able to control this state, that nothing is gonna like move without their say so, and that like we also see Cyrus, who's just kind of like amazed at certain gangs just kind of like just standing next to one another, because there's like certain gangs that all that had beef at one point with one another, but they're just like, it's odd that certain gangs are standing alongside one another, like to kind of see this unity for this one purpose. So, and supposedly most of the people were supposed to come unarmed, but I guess not everybody believed that. So, that leads us to realize that I guess supposedly Cyrus and his gang called the Riffs, or uh, the Gracieri Riffs. I'm just gonna call them the Riffs. Like supposedly Cyrus and his gang is like the largest gang out of all the other gangs in this this area. So like really, that's the main reason why Cyrus called this is because he has the biggest gang, anyways. And so if anybody's going to step to him or whichever, like they're probably going to end up dead. So what ends up happening while Cyrus is making this speech, like basically saying how like he wants to control this place and wants to like get everyone together, and everybody's like, yeah, this sounds like a good move, up until this gang called the Rogues, who has this guy named Luther who decides, you know what, I'm not a part of just alliancing myself with anybody. That's the whole point of a gang. So we have Luther who ends up deciding to go and shoot Cyrus while he's doing this whole speech and can you dig it and all kinds of cool stuff. So all of a sudden we are to have Luther who is to shoot Cyrus, and all of a sudden everybody is scrambling because there's a gun being fired. And so one of the warrior gang is to see that Luther had shot Cyrus, and so and that gang member is actually not easily shown. It's not Cowboy, it's the other one. Really? Seriously, out of the one note that I had, uh, I don't think it was Vermin or Cowboy. It was one of the warriors, let's just say. Uh, the one warrior that I think died really quickly in the subway station, and of course, that's the one thing that I don't have present on me. So, yeah, so that leads us to eventually forcibly having like the rogues just say like, well, hey, all the warriors like need to die so that way like nobody gets the information out that that Luther had actually killed Cyrus. So Luther and the rogues are saying to another group, I think that is called the Rifts, that the warriors um, had killed Cyrus, and so Cleo is to all of a sudden be in the midst of these rift-like men, and so all of a sudden he starts like fighting them because they just naturally assumed that one of the warriors killed Cyrus. So Cleo, sadly enough, just gets beaten to death, and so that leads everybody just running off like crazy because they don't know what the heck is going on. And so we have the rift after all this thing is to be done and over with. All of a sudden, like some of the rift members tells their leader, which is I guess the Messiah, the guy with the big sunglasses, like the big silver sunglasses, and they end up telling him it's like, hey, the warriors supposedly had killed Cyrus. So it's like, okay, so like let's get the word out. I want the DJ to let everybody know that like the warriors are dead, that uh, they're going to be killed. So the DJ goes on and is to say like, hey, like mentioning about what had all gone on and like playing the song "Nowhere to Run To," because the Warriors, I guess, are to like have a warrant being put out for them by the Rift saying like, do we want these guys dead? So, uh, so eventually we have the warriors that are just kind of like making their way they're like, god, like dude, we have so far to get back to where we're from compared to everyone else. Like they're on like I think they're on like Coney Island, or they're on like the whatever island, whatever like part of like, so they have a stretch compared to everyone else who is just kind of like almost locally here, or they don't have very far to go. So First off, the Warriors are to try and uh, like eventually see like a certain gang called the Turnbulls, the Turnbull ACs, or the Turnbull Axe. So these Turnbull this Turnbull gang is to eventually see the Warriors, but like they kind of drive by and not exactly like get into any real scuffle between these guys because the Warriors are kind of easily hiding out. Plus, like none of the Warriors, of course, are packing anything. They didn't like. If anything, they probably just have spray paint. If anything, we have one of the Warriors who consistently goes through and like spray paints a W to remind people that they were there. But like, yeah, so these guys in this bus are to just drive by. They eventually see the Warriors, but they don't act upon it. And plus, once they eventually do act upon it, it's a little too late. I think a lot of the Warriors end up calling these guys like cue balls or whatever. They like whatever kind of bizarre name that they're gonna go into here. So that eventually leads the Warriors to eventually move on to a gang called the Orphans, because eventually the Warriors are just kind of like making their way through town, and all of a sudden, uh, we have like the Warriors who end up spotting these guys called the Orphans. So, and evidently they know like these guys are the Orphans, but they're like, but why weren't they there at the like? Why weren't they there at the meeting? Like, why weren't they there at the Cyrus meeting? So eventually Swan is to eventually become the leader, the war leader of this warrior group. Because like AJ is kind of like wanting to become like war leader, but like everybody's just saying like, dude, Swan is just going to become the war leader, so just let him become the war leader. It's obvious that he's going to be it, and but Ajax like wants to just kind of like, hey, why not me? But anyway, so like it was really interesting to kind of like see like when Cleone is to be dead, like how all of a sudden we start to see some dissension in the ranks, but it's obvious that it's Swan who's going to be the leader here. But anyways, and so really we have Swan and we have one other warrior member who is to go to the orphans and just kind of say like, hey, yeah, like weren't you guys at that meeting? And the orphans were like, no, like why weren't we called? If anything, like we're just as bad as everyone else is. Like look at our newspaper clipping. And they're like, yeah, like I guess you guys are something. Like, yeah, like supposedly the DJ ends up calling the orphans a minor league team, because evidently like this gang, sadly enough, is just so like small meat and potatoes that that eventually like they weren't even a blip on the radar, sadly enough. But it seems like they do have the numbers, and it seems like they are pretty big guys. So, anyways, like, but this like gang is to basically just have all like of one colored shirt that just says like the word "the orphans" on the back of it. Like it kind of looks like they have like they're like a prison kind of gang, like to me, but they're not in prison. So, anyways, so uh, so what ends up happening is the Warriors are like, hey man, like we just want to make it by. And so all of a sudden we have like this woman named Mercy who's walking down these stairs, and Mercy is just like, hey, like, can I get one of those vests? Like, yeah, can you give me one of those I guess is like a joke because like probably for Mercy, like realizes that they only have a very limited amount of vests for these guys, and so maybe that's a whole like rib about how like there's not really much of any other vests for this movie. So, but I don't know, maybe it was just like Mercy was just like, hey, let me join your gang kind of thing. I want to get out of these orphans because like so we kind of have like the Warriors that are kind of mentioning to Mercy that she is probably like a hooker or something like that, like that. Uh, that she's like, what is she even like thinking about? Like trying to get with the Warriors, but eventually Mercy ends up with Swan, and they it seems like they're just attached to the hip for most of this movie. So uh so what ends up happening is Mercy gives the leader of the orphans crap about like, dude, like if this one gang starts just walking through our territory, like what's gonna happen when like other gangs just start, like is everybody just gonna walk through this territory like and just walk all over us? Like we can't let that happen. And so the leader of the orphans is just like, okay, fine, like Warriors, like if you go and take off your vests and you look like civilians, like we'll let you guys pass. And the Warriors are like, no, we don't do that, like no, like that's not going to happen. And so the orphans are just like, well, hey, if you do not take your colors off, like we're gonna have to fight you. And the Warriors are just like, fine, like I don't care, like freaking like whatever you want, like whatever, what, like we'll do whatever. So it ends up that eventually that Mercy is to tie herself up with the Warriors. And at first it seems like Mercy is just to be kind of tossed around between these guys, where like some of them are kind of mentioning it's like, hey, how about I get me some of that? And like Ajax is like grabbing onto her and whatever, but eventually Swan is like, you know what, like she's mine, like I'll claim her, like yeah, you know what, like I'll treat her right. So what ends up happening is the orphans go on and get all kinds of like wrenches and like the leader of the orphans has this like razor, like old fashioned like sling blade razor or whatever. So uh so the leader of the orphans is like, now you mess with the orphans. See what you get when you mess with the orphans? And it's like, so I guess the Warriors had this master plan after all. If there was to be like no real weapons that they could have, the one thing that they did come up with was having a Molotov with them. And so what they end up doing is they end up chucking these Molotov onto a car, which I guess scares the orphans to scramble off. And so that eventually just leads the guys just like, okay, well, let's go on to the next subway and get the heck out of here. So eventually we start having at some point the Warriors like starting to like break apart, but eventually Swan is to tell them like, hey, like we're all going to meet at this one station and regroup. And like if anything, if we all like forcibly have to separate, because at some point in this movie they do, like then the big plan is to like eventually meet all up at this one station. So what ends up eventually happening is that uh I'm trying to figure out where like Mercy is during this point because I don't quite see her during this point. But anyways, so like we have Swan that is trying to protect Mercy through certain points and like telling her to kind of like maybe like buzz off at some points because like they're really getting their butts kicked in or they're really just kind of having a lot of people after them. But Mercy is just like, dude, I'm sticking with you guys like till the end of this. But there's just some spots where I'm just like, okay, where is Mercy during like a bunch of the fight out points? Which I'm always kind of like, where is she at? Is she like getting a cap somewhere? Like, was she hiding out somewhere? And then eventually she pops out when eventually like fights are over. But anyways, mood point. So all the gangs in the very beginning of this are getting prepared to all get uh, after the Warriors. Like we start to see like the baseball Furies going and getting their baseball bats out of this one like thing of stairs, and like people are getting their knives out, and people are getting all kinds of stuff kind of prepared. Uh, so now we are at a part of the baseball Furies. So really, we have a part where eventually, like the Warriors start to get very tired. Like we have people, like all the Warriors are starting to run consistently, and like try to run away from the baseball Furies, because like all these guys just have baseball bats and these guys have nothing, and so they're just like, well, how about we run for it? And so it gets to the point where they mainly focus on Swan, Ajax, and Cowboy, because eventually, like, we start to dwindle down some numbers here. When eventually, like, some of the Warriors are in this subway station, because eventually the cops are after them, and that's what kind of separates a bunch of the group. When the cops are to start to come after the Warriors, like during the subway station, I think especially right after like the orphans, when all the Warriors were to go into the subway, and then all of a sudden once they were to like eventually cops were showing up at the subway, everybody had to scramble and separate. Hence why you don't see the whole entire group together, I believe, at this point. So, but eventually both Ajax, Cowboy, and Swan, and it would probably have to be Mercy because that would make a lot of sense. Uh, so eventually we have like the baseball Furies who are running after the Warriors, and eventually it gets to the point where Cowboy is mentioning to Ajax that he can't run anymore, and Ajax is like, well, great, because I'm tired of running from these wusses. So like Cowboy and Ajax are fighting the baseball Furies, and like Swan comes in and is to like kind of be like the kind of like beating them down too, because I guess Swan also realizes that the other people in the group are stopping, so he's gonna stop and try to fight these guys off. So that leads to, of course, like Cowboys getting freaking clocked, but Ajax is like not even grabbing a baseball bat; he's just punching everybody. And so, like, I guess because maybe Ajax was kind of concerned that he would actually like hit somebody with a baseball bat for real. So maybe he's just like, yeah, let me just pretend that I'm gonna punch these guys, so that way, like, I don't accidentally hit them with a bat. Like, I can probably be better off like using like I can be better off like looking like I'm gonna punch them for real, and like instead of accidentally hitting them with a bat, because like that's I think the reason why like a lot of these movies tend to do punches rather than using props, because I think in a lot of the early stages like they didn't have like rubber like things to hit people with, so a lot of times people could actually get hurt because like cheap movie and they couldn't get rubber things, so whatever. So but yeah, so you just start to see Swan, and you just start to see Ajax, and you just start to see like Cowboy, like they're trying to just take all these guys out, and of course they do. And so I guess that's when Mercy just regathers with the group. So uh, that transitions us to start to see like the other half of the Warriors group eventually uh, going with this girl group called the Lizzies, and so that leads us to see I think Snow, um, Cochise, and Vermin are to eventually like head with the Lizzies, and eventually we and Rembrandt, he also goes there too, because eventually Rembrandt is to talk with one of the Lizzies, and the Lizzies go and tell them that they had killed Cyrus, and that's how Rembrandt eventually is like, oh, so here's why, like, all these gangs are going off to kill us. It's not just because we're on their turf. No, it's just because, like, we killed Cyrus, or they assume we killed Cyrus. Uh, so that ends up happening. Uh, the Lizzies are going, and it seems like these women are to be offered up to like Vermin and Cochise I think it's Cochise. I could be pronouncing that wrong. And Rembrandt, like everybody's like, man, we need to come to this place more often. Like, yeah, this is great. So all of a sudden, like these women are busting out these weapons, and then they're like, whoa. So, like, really, we have the warriors that are kind of outnumbered from these women, but eventually they just head the heck out of there. Because, like, I think we have Rembrandt who ends up getting stabbed and ends up getting, like, a bandana over his arm. And then eventually, like, once we get, I think, to the next train station, we also get the warriors to regroup. So, oh, and we also didn't get to the rogues. So there's one spot where the rogues are going to a like a grocery store and just getting like candy, and they're not paying for any of it. And so we have like the one rogue member that is asking Luther like about like what they're gonna do for the night, because like Luther is saying like, yeah, man, I'm having fun. And like, so like eventually like the rogues are to want to kill all the warriors before the rifts are to get to the warriors, because the rifts want the warriors alive, and the rogues are just like, no, we have to kill them before they get to the rifts. So because if anything, like the warriors are gonna mention that they didn't kill Cyrus, and plus also the warriors all should probably end up dead before like somebody squeals anyways, or like somebody comes forward, and I guess one of the rogue members, because like he looks like a rogue member, eventually goes to the rifts towards the end of this film and squeals that it's like, hey, like Luther ended up killing Cyrus, it wasn't the warriors all along. And so like it's kind of funny where the DJ is like, oh, sorry, the warriors, like my bad, like our bad, like we freaking went after you and it wasn't even the right person after all. But it's like somebody came up and finally, like, you would have thought with the number of people that would have been at this meeting, like a billion people would have actually saw or eyewitnessed or eyeballed who freaking killed Cyrus, but I guess we're completely wrong. You would have thought there would have, like, if this was done in, like, current time, like, somebody would have, like, caught this on a cell phone or took, like, a screenshot or, like, something. There would have been, like, some evidence of this meeting. Like, there probably would have been a news bulletin out there, like, just kind of, like I gotta catch this moment. Like, you would have thought like somebody would have easily, if this was done in current time, you would have had this thing or scenario wrapped up fairly easily, because some gang member would have just easily just like tweeted this out, just like, oh hey, Luther actually killed this and like killed this guy, and like, yeah, like, why aren't you guys going after that guy? That's actually the correct person. Like, I was tweeting this and like I was live streaming this, and look, Luther killed him. And then this movie would have ended a lot quicker. Like, just been like, yeah, you're going after the wrong guys. But yeah, so the warriors are just like cleaning house from everybody. Even when like the Lizzies like catch them off guard, just because like they didn't really realize that this was just some gang, but like they just thought it was a bunch of attractive women that were all together. Uh, so pushing on, uh, and no, when the rogues left the grocery store, the one woman that was selling them all this stuff, she was like, "Hey, like, you gotta pay for all that." And Luther's like, "Pay for what?" You're freaking chucks crap and then walks off. So, but anyways, so the Warriors get back together. I think there is even a spot somewhere in here where like the Warriors are going onto the subway, and like they call it a train, but I would call it like a light rail or a subway or something. So like eventually there's like people who I guess had come from prom and have these like corsets and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden like there's this awkward moment where like the prom like people are looking at the Warriors and how they're all like beat up through this whole thing. So but I think that happens like way towards the tail end of this film. So the Warriors regroup together, and so what ends up eventually happening is like I think that this is the very like next stop that they're on this subway where eventually we have this band called the Punks, and there's to be like a bunch of these guys that are all wearing like overalls, like as if they're like I don't quite get like they're like I guess they probably at this point they probably ran out of stuff for like people to wear to make them look different. So they're like, shouldn't these guys have called like shouldn't they have been called like the farmers or like shouldn't they have been called like farmer tan or something like the punks just doesn't quite work like for me to call these people the punks. Like I would say like they would be like they should have like mohawks and like be punk rocker looking like characters, but like they don't have that. They're just guys in overalls that are just like one guy is on rollerblades, and so they're called the punks. Like doesn't in my mind kind of match up, but maybe that's just the 79 stereotype of what a punk would look like. I don't know. I'm sure they probably like they spent a lot of money for this thing to have like a lot of these separate outfits and whatever. So eventually something had to fall through the cracks. So, but anyways, so Mercy is to point out to Swan that obviously, hey, those guys are the punks and they're going to come after you. And like Swan is just like, everyone's coming after us. Like, what's the difference? Like, uh, so reasonably, uh, Swan is also just mad at Mercy because it's like, yeah, thanks for like blowing my cover basically because like I knew that they were after me, but now that you now like they know that I know that you know that I know, like so. So it's like thanks a lot. So all of a sudden the rest of the Warriors like come on down, and so we have Swan who's just like, yeah, like here we go again. But at least we have some guys like we have Cowboy who still has a baseball bat. Uh, like I think one other person I think supposedly had a baseball bat, but then it's now gone. Like, dude, you know what? Like, here's a stupid thing. So these people don't have much of weapons anyways, and you would think any time that they were to have gotten like a baseball bat or something to defend themselves, you would have thought they would have like stuck to that like glue. Like you would have thought that they would have just been like, dude, I'm gonna freaking have this under my arm, or I'm gonna keep this with me at all freaking times because I don't know who I'm gonna get jumped by. And yeah, it's not a gun, but like plus also here would also have been like the really smart thing to do. I think they obviously should have just like had a what they should have done is they should have went like early on into this place and just have like a weapons spot, or maybe you could have weapons dealers that are off to the side here and like could have bought a gun, but then again like this movie would be a lot shorter, uh, but like still it would have been kind of smart, it kind of would have been clever, but anyway, so whatever. Anyways, lot shorter movie though. So, because every time some gang would just come in and be like, pow, and be like, okay, yeah, see you guys, see you later. Because I can't believe a ton of people would come to this meeting completely unarmed. Like, to me, that doesn't make any rational sense anyways. But you would think, like, a lot of the people would come there and be like, hey, like, we're gonna be completely non-violent. It's if anything you can come packing, but like don't come like wielding anything, if you know what I mean. So but yeah, so we have the punks that are to eventually chase the warriors into this men's bathroom, and we have Mercy, who's now pulling etiquette, who's like, "Hey, this is the men's bathroom," and Vermin is grabbing Mercy into the bathroom because he's like, "Are you serious? Like, come on!" Like, so all of the warriors are going into the bathroom stall, and so the punks follow them in there. And so all the punks just are like getting ready. They're getting their weapons ready to open up these bathroom stalls to go and like start like getting at the warriors. And I think there are probably some stuff that ends up getting reused through a portion of this movie where probably uh, the punks probably like took a baseball bat from like the baseball furies. Like there is probably some reusing of props here, but like also you can probably make the consensus that there might have been actually some gangs that were actually the same people. Because I'm like, for how many number of people were probably in this thing, like I can't believe that every single one of these gangs like were all separate. Like you would think it'd be really cool if like one guy was like in three different gangs and you would have never have known. Uh, but like maybe they were all separate. Maybe they just like paid all these guys. Like that would be really expensive. Why not just reuse certain people and like make it cheaper? Because how would anyone know? Uh, like they wouldn't. Like there's so much a scrambled bag of so many people, you wouldn't know the difference. I wish that the Warriors would actually get like redone as an animated movie. That would be pretty sweet. Like I think a lot of people would be excited about that, even though it's like, well, like because you could still have all the people or most of the people still do the voices. Like I'm sure they would love to be a part of that if like they already did the game. Why not just do like an animated movie with the Warriors? Just kind of like a much more updated, like much more like there's a lot of different stories you can pull off, and plus also like you could have a lot more like drastically different gangs in this movie to just kind of update things. That'd be kind of cool. But anyways, so uh but yeah, so the Warriors break out of these stalls and start beating the crap out of the punks. We have one guy who ends up breaking a mirror. Bad luck for him. But also, like, Vermin breaks freaking one or two mirrors with his body because someone, like, flings him up against this wall and he, like, smashes up against these mirrors. So, but eventually, of course, the Warriors beat the spread and beat the crap out of the punks. And so what ends up happening is that, of course, like the Warriors just keep cleaning house and just keep beating through every bit of any of these people. There was one, the guy with the rollerblades eventually has this blade, and I guess Swan eventually takes the blade from that guy, the sling blade thing, whatever it's called, blade, whatever, knife. So so that pushes on to have these guys go through another subway to eventually just make it home. But even when they make it home, they're not really exactly home. Like they still have to like go up against the rogues trying to stop these guys from being safe, 100% safe. So uh and so the uh that's when like the Rifts are to find out that Luther had killed Cyrus, and so now eventually the Rifts are going to make their way to where the warriors are to help them and also save them from the rogues. So what ends up happening is the warriors are kind of walking through town. All of a sudden, we have this graffitied colored car that is to be of the rogues. And so what ends up happening is the warriors like are sneaking behind this little bridge and are starting to like rip apart all these like pieces to eventually have like as best as like weapons as they could have had. But I'm like, dude, you could have had like a baseball bat. You could have had all kinds of stuff, but no, like whatever, like whatever with this group. So in the end, we have to, of course, do the bottle clicking and have the Warriors come out and play for numerous times over until the Warriors decide, like, okay, let's dance. Like, let's freaking go out onto the beach and let's just freaking just, like, get this over with. So we have Luther that is mentioning to this entire, like, Warriors, it's like, dude, you're gonna freaking die. Like, you're gonna die right here. Because, of course, Luther is to have a gun. And so what ends up easily happening is freaking Swan takes his knife and just flings it into Luther's arm. Luther is to fire a shot, but it hits nothing. But Luther drops his gun and gets a knife in the arm for his trouble. Swan is to take the knife out, and that is all of a sudden when the Rifts come in, and the Rifts are just like, "Hey, Warriors, like you're a pretty good gang," and Swan is just like the best, like, and so the Rifts are just like, okay, like you guys can get out of here. They make way for them, and so like the Warriors are walking off, and so all of a sudden you just start to see like the Rifts that are just walking to the Rogues, and I guess we would have to naturally assume they just kill them all off because like they have the numbers compared to the Rogues. So that just leads to have the Warriors decide like what they're going to do next. We have Swan that's thinking about, you know what, like maybe like I want to get out of this town. Like we have one spot where like it's kind of funny when Swan and Mercy were kind of like making their way like through like subway whatever stations and whatever, where like Swan told Mercy at some point, he's like, you know what, like I've been hoping to find something better during this whole like time of like me going through this spot, because like Swan is kind of making fun of Mercy and Mercy is kind of making fun of Swan, and so like Swan is kind of calling like Mercy just kind of uh like this dirty girl or whatever, just kind of like get under her skin and so on and so forth. And so, but eventually that leads to Swan mentioning at the end of this movie that eventually he wants to go, like, he wants to take a road trip. He wants to get out of here. And so Mercy's like, well, I can go on a road trip. It's like, of course, like, this girl is going to want to do anything that Swan's going to want to do. And so why not? Like, I think Swan ended up doing the movie like Xanadu. And so more than likely that could win a lot of women over in a lot of ways. Um, but yeah, so so like really like that's kind of where the movie really just ends off. And so with that said, considering this is about an hour and a half movie, I should probably call this one a wrap. I just had fun with this movie. It's a real fun piece. Anyways, also like there might have been some kind of thing that whatever. Stuff happens when I do a review, so if there's anything I slipped or whatever, I said the wrong name, it'll happen eventually. Someone will correct or whatever in whatever kind of way that they want to do that. But fun film, just enjoyable. Oh, what happens to Ajax? That is probably an important thing to mention. At one point, we have a woman that is to be sitting on a bench, and Ajax is like, you know what, I'm going to give me some of that. And so they're just like, really, Ajax? Like, I think at one point we have like two of the Warrior members going back after Ajax to see what just happened to him. And so Ajax is to go and sit on a bench with this woman. And all of a sudden we have this woman handcuffing Ajax, and she's blowing this like whistle. Woo, woo. I guess this woman just does a citizen arrest, and so like a lot of people were bummed that Ajax didn't make it all the way through the whole movie, but like the guy who played Ajax himself, which was James Remmer, like he was like, yeah, like Ajax, I think had to get caught. Like I'm completely okay with how my character played out, and plus also they only did one movie anyway, so it was just like, well, like Ajax did make a lot of mistakes. Like Ajax was always willing to go into a fight, and so it's kind of surprising that he didn't get killed at some point or another, when maybe he was to get outnumbered somewhere or something like that. That eventually Ajax wasn't just to get a guy that was just be killed somewhere. Uh, but anyways, so yeah, like and so Ajax ends up getting arrested, and so he ends up trying to put up a good defense between this police officer, but he's basically handcuffed to a bench. Where could he really go? So, but yeah, so Ajax got arrested, and so yeah, like I guess I completely forgot about that because I was like, okay, let's get this going. Um, but yeah, like Ajax is a really important role, and I apologize for how late I went into with that. But with that said, I just wanted to kind of clear the air and kind of think if there was anything that was left over, left out, that a lot of people like might have had a problem with. But with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.